What's a young woman like you doing with Gramps? The words hit me like a blast of icy wind as I glanced up from the menu at Harrington's Bistro in Portland, Oregon. 3 college-aged guys loomed behind my husband, Ethan, their smirks radiating the overconfidence of youth too sure of its own charm. I'm Lauren Hayes. I'm 43, and by now, I've learned appearances deceive more often than not. People tend to see a petite woman with soft features and assume I'm sweet, gentle, harmless. They're not entirely wrong. I value peace. But a dozen years in special operations taught me that peace sometimes comes only through control. Ethan, now 45, didn't even raise an eyebrow. He calmly sliced into his trout, the amber light from the hanging fixtures glinting off the gray in his beard. I caught the subtle shift in his shoulders. He was analyzing. Like me, he had served. He left active duty a few years back, now working as a private threat response consultant. Does he even still, function? One of the guys laughed, blonde hair, leather varsity jacket, name tag from some campus job. His tone dripped mockery. Seriously, what's the angle here? The second guy, stockier, covered in piercings, snorted. Maybe she's his caretaker or something. Helps Grandpa chew. His friends called him Mason. He reeked of bad beer and cheap cologne. The last one, Connor, had the kind of sharp gaze that should have warned him to stay quiet, but the pressure of his buddies dulled his better instincts. Come on, girl, Mason added, leaning in. You could do way better. Dump the old timer and come party. A familiar calm fell over me, the kind that settled in my chest before missions overseas. My mind clicked into gear, assess threats, scan for exits, protect the asset. Tonight, the asset was Ethan's peace, and our dignity. Gentlemen, I said gently but clearly, enjoy your evening. My voice had that undercurrent, the quiet command honed by years of training. Ethan glanced up at me, recognizing the signal. The surrounding tables were tuning in. A nearby couple whispered. A family with a toddler looked visibly tense. The manager, late 20s, thin and unsure, hovered by the kitchen, clearly out of his depth. Blondie, Brandon, stepped in closer. His cologne mixed with sweat and alcohol. Oh come on, don't be like that. We're just being friendly. He reached for my shoulder. I saw if you stayed with this story until the end, chances are, it moved you. So give it a like and subscribe to the channel. We share more stories that prove true strength is found in the quietest moments. Dance jaw flex. What stirred in me wasn't rage. It was certainty. These kids had no idea what they were stepping into, and their arrogance would be their undoing. We'd dealt with our share of comments before. People often stared when Ethan and I walked into a room. Some assumed I was after his money. Others guessed he was chasing lost youth. No one ever suspected that we'd met on a joint military op 10 years ago, both of us elite operators. Ethan had been my field instructor for just a few months before reassignment. Years later, we reconnected at a military charity gala. The spark was instant. He understood my civilian transition like no one else could. Ma'am, is everything all right? The manager finally stepped up, nervously wringing his hands. His badge read Eric. He looked barely older than the guys hassling us. We're fine, thank you, I said, keeping my voice even. Just finishing dinner. Brandon let out a theatrical laugh. See? She's cool with it. We're just talking here. He leaned toward Ethan, invading his personal space. Nothing wrong with that, right? Old man? I watched Ethan closely. His hands stayed relaxed on the table, his breathing steady, but his eyes were cold now. We were both calculating. No sudden moves. No escalation. Unless we had to. Mason, hyped by Brandon's energy, stepped in. Bet you were a real badass in your day, huh? What was it, Desert Storm? Maybe Gulf War, Connor grinned. Back before all the drones and fancy toys. The ignorance might have been amusing if it hadn't been so laced with disrespect. Ethan had deployed to the Middle East multiple times. He had commendations for counter-intel work no one outside the military would ever hear about. Explaining any of that now would be pointless. Boys, Ethan said, calmly but firmly. You might want to return to your table. Or what, Grandpa? Brandon scoffed, squaring up. You gonna throw down in the bistro? The room fell silent. Even the kitchen staff peeked out. Phones began to rise, ready to record. I laid my napkin down and stood, slow and deliberate. At 5 feet 5 inches and 118 pounds, I probably looked like I was surrendering. Their grins widened, confident I was backing off. We're heading out, I said, grabbing my bag. Ethan, you ready? We moved toward the exit, but the trio stepped in to block us. Brandon's expression shifted. The liquor had taken hold. This wasn't just a game to him anymore. Crossing the dining area felt like walking a tightrope over glass. Every step emboldened them. Brandon whispered to Mason, who laughed and nodded. Connor hesitated, but still didn't step away. Excuse us, Ethan said politely as we reached the gap between tables where they stood shoulder to shoulder. Yeah, no, Brandon replied, arms crossed. Me and your girlfriend weren't done talking. Wife, Ethan said quietly. The word hung in the air. Connor feigned surprise. Wife. Yikes. What's next, sleeping pills at bedtime? The cocktail of youth and booze turned bitter. They thought they were being clever. They had no idea they were teasing a sleeping wolf. I don't want any trouble, I said, my tone still controlled. We're just trying to leave. See, that's the problem, Connor cut in. We're not done here. This is fun. Brandon stepped into Ethan's space again, chest nearly touching. My husband didn't budge. But he didn't escalate either. He was giving them one last chance. You know what I think? Brandon said loud enough for the whole room. I think this little thing needs someone who can actually perform. Someone who doesn't need blue pills to get through the night. The air crackled. Ethan's face flushed, not from embarrassment, but restrained fury. His hands clenched briefly, then relaxed. That's when I knew. They wanted to provoke us. To humiliate us for fun. They thought I looked soft and Ethan looked weak. They had no idea we had over 2 decades of tactical training between us. All right, I said, letting the steel creep into my voice. If you want to do this the hard way, let's step outside. Brandon's eyes lit up. Oh, hell yes. You hear that? He called. Granny wants to throw down in the parking lot. Mason hooped. This is gonna be sick. Connor hesitated, but followed anyway. Peer pressure is powerful. As we moved toward the door, I caught Ethan's eye and gave him a small nod. He answered with the slightest smile. They were walking straight into the lion's den. The Portland night was crisp and still as we stepped into Harrington's lot. Sunset cast long shadows between the parked cars. The 3 boys followed with all the swagger of kids who'd never had to live with the consequences of their actions. This is perfect, Brandon crowed. No crowd, just a few security cams. Who's gonna believe this, anyway? Mason already had his phone out. Dude, we have to film this. 3 college dudes versus Grandpa and his trophy wife. It's gonna blow up. I shrugged off my cardigan, folded it neatly, and placed it on Ethan's truck hood. The motion exposed the years of discipline carved into my shoulders and arms. They didn't notice. Too drunk. Too arrogant. And completely unprepared. Last chance to walk away, Ethan said quietly, positioning himself where he could keep the 3 students in view while staying clear of my path. No harm done. No grudges. Oh, come on, old man, Connor jeered, his voice full of mockery. You seriously gonna let your wife fight your battles for you? That's pathetic, even for your generation. I took a long breath, centering myself the way my instructors taught me nearly 2 decades ago. That familiar calm rolled in like a tide, where everything slowed down and every detail sharpened into focus. Alright, I said, rolling my shoulders loose. You want me? One at a time. The way I said it, completely certain, without a trace of fear, cut through the liquor fog clinging to Brandon's brain. For the first time, doubt flickered across his face. Wait, what? Mason stopped filming, thrown off by my sudden shift from passive to predator. You heard me, I continued, my tone snapping into command mode, the same one I used during briefings. You wanted to prove you're tough, gentlemen? Here's your chance. But we do it fair, I added. One at a time. No weapons. No pack behavior. Connor stepped back a little, his bravado finally cracking. Look, maybe we got carried away. We don't actually want to hurt anyone. Too late for that, I said calmly, tying my hair back. You followed us. You threatened my husband. You made your intentions clear. So now, let's finish what you started. Brandon, sensing his friend's weakening, puffed up in an attempt to reassert dominance. Whatever. This is dumb anyway. I'll just knock you down real quick and we can all move on. He was a big guy, 6 foot something and maybe 210 pounds of what he thought was muscle. But size doesn't mean anything if you don't know how to use it. And from his stance alone, I could tell, he'd never been in a real fight. Ethan, I called. Would you mind stepping back a little? This might get messy. He nodded and moved toward the restaurant doors. I caught the smile playing at the corner of his mouth. He'd seen me spar back in our military days. He knew exactly what was about to happen. You know what? Mason muttered, lifting his phone again. Maybe we should get this on camera after all. If the cops show, we'll have proof she attacked us. Great idea, I said sweetly. Make sure you get my good side. I sounded like I was posing for a family photo, not bracing for a fight, and that unnerved them more than anything. Connor took another step back. Instincts finally kicking in, even through the booze. But Brandon was locked in. Pride and peer pressure had dragged him too far to back out now. He lunged forward, throwing the kind of wild, clumsy punch that wouldn't have landed on a scarecrow. 15 years of combat training was about to meet 3 boys who thought TikTok brawls counted as martial arts. His right hook swung just where I expected it. In the split second it took him to commit, I had already chosen the outcome. Step left, shift forward, grab the arm, redirect the force, and let physics do the work. I sidestepped, caught his extended arm, and used his momentum to spin him hard. Brandon's eyes widened in shock as his body twisted away from me, totally off balance. What the? He managed to gasp just before I gave him a gentle shove toward the massive dumpster behind the bistro. The crash echoed through the lot as he went in headfirst, straight into a week's worth of seafood scraps and rotting greens. His legs flailed as he scrambled to escape the stench and filth. Mason stood frozen, phone still recording, jaw open. How did you, he stammered. Physics, I replied casually. Force equals mass times acceleration. Your buddy brought the mass and the momentum. I just handled the direction. Connor had gone pale. Mason still hadn't moved. This was luck, Mason said, almost convincing himself. He slipped or something. You want to test that theory? I asked, turning to face him fully. He was shorter than Brandon, but built like he'd spent more time flexing in mirrors than learning real technique. He placed his phone on the hood of a nearby car, then cracked his neck and squared up. I do CrossFit, he announced, like that explained something. That's cute, I replied. I do combat. He came at me with more coordination than Brandon had. At least he kept his guard up. Went for a tackle instead of a wild swing. But gym routines are no match for battlefield reflexes. As he lunged, I sidestepped, gripped his belt, and used his forward momentum to guide him, right into the decorative fountain in the outdoor seating area. The splash was magnificent. Mason surfaced sputtering and soaked, the tough guy mask washed clean off with his hair gel. The fountain wasn't deep, but it was cold. And judging by his expression, the chill had sobered him up instantly. "My phone," he cried, realizing he'd dropped it mid-flop. "It's ruined." From inside the dumpster, Brandon was groaning about something slimy he'd discovered among the garbage. Their combined whining made for a tragic little soundtrack. Connor, now the only one standing, dry, and relatively dignified, looked from his soaked friends to me. One look at my face, and he understood what the others hadn't: discretion is the better part of valor. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, backing away with his hands up. "We were drunk and stupid. I'm really, really sorry. Please don't hurt me." Then he did something that stunned all of us, including himself. He started to cry. Full-on sobs. The adrenaline, the shame, the booze, it all hit at once. "I want my mom," he whimpered, fumbling his phone out with trembling hands. "I just want to go home." The whole encounter had lasted under 3 minutes. 2 college guys defeated. One on the verge of a meltdown. And I hadn't even broken a sweat. Ethan returned to my side, shaking his head with admiration. 15 years in Black Ops and you still managed to surprise me." "One idiot at a time," I replied, straightening my blouse. "The aftermath? Honestly, it was the best part." Brandon eventually crawled out of the dumpster, dripping with something that looked like marinara, wilted lettuce, and maybe an old fish. The stench was so bad, even Mason, still waist-deep in fountain water, winced. "This is assault," Brandon yelled. "I'm calling the cops. I'm calling my lawyer. I'm calling everyone." "Excellent idea," I said, pulling my phone from my purse. "Let's call them together. I'm sure they'll be very interested in the security footage showing 3 men following a woman into a parking lot." Brandon's face turned redder than the sauce on his shirt. "You attacked us." "Did I?" I asked innocently, turning to Ethan. "Did you see me attack anyone?" My husband, now with a perfect view of the chaos, shook his head solemnly. "I saw 3 grown men trip over themselves and fall into a variety of unfortunate objects." "Clumsy bunch," I added. Mason finally dragged himself out of the fountain, clothes soaked, body shivering. His phone, clearly dead. "This isn't over," he muttered, lips blue. "Oh, I think it is," I said. "Unless you want to explain to the police why you harassed a couple at dinner, followed them outside, and then magically lost a fight to gravity." Connor was still on the phone with his mom, sniffling as he tried to explain. "No, Mom, I don't know how it happened. 1 second we were talking to this lady, then Brandon was in the trash, Tyler was in the fountain, and I think I need therapy." The back door of the bistro swung open. Eric, the manager, stepped out with 2 staffers behind him. They took in the scene, one guy soaked in garbage, one dripping from the fountain, one sobbing into a phone, and Ethan and me, untouched and calm. "Everything all right out here?" Eric asked cautiously. "It is now," I replied pleasantly. "These gentlemen were just leaving. We always review security footage when guests claim they were assaulted on our property," Eric said, matter-of-factly. "Standard protocol." Tyler and Connor exchanged uneasy glances. Even through their buzz and shame, the realization was dawning: pressing charges would mean exposing everything, to police, school administrators, and likely their families. "You know what?" Connor blurted, ending his phone call. "Maybe we just forget this happened." "Speak for yourself," Brandon muttered, still scraping something unidentifiable off his shirt. "Shut up, Brandon," Tyler snapped. "You want to explain to a dean why we got booked for harassment? You want that on our records?" The sobering truth was finally cracking through the fog of ego and alcohol. This wasn't some random bar scuffle. They hadn't targeted nobodies, they'd cornered a married couple on camera, in a lit parking lot, and it was all going to follow them far beyond tonight. The fight was over. But their humiliation? Just beginning. The final poetic note arrived when Connor's mom pulled up in a dented silver Honda Civic, headlights flickering. She stepped out, small, tired, wearing nursing scrubs, and took one look at her son's tear-streaked face, then at the ridiculous scene unfolding in front of her. "Connor James Whitman," she said with that universal mother tone reserved for moments of total disgrace. "What in God's name have you done?" He tried to explain, sniffling. But even to his ears, the story was ridiculous. "We were just talking to this lady, and then everything went nuts, and Brandon ended up in the trash, and Tyler fell into the fountain, and she didn't even do anything but somehow it's all our fault." Her gaze swept over the parking lot. Brandon, still pulling lettuce from his hair. Tyler, soaked and shivering. And me, calm, composed, standing like I'd just come from a coffee date. "Ma'am," she said to me, her voice full of mortified sincerity. "I'm so sorry for what my son and his friends put you through. This isn't how I raised him." "I understand," I replied gently. "Boys sometimes make bad choices when they drink. I'm sure he's learned something." Connor nodded furiously. "I have. I swear, Mom, I have." Brandon's ride arrived next, a lifted truck driven by someone who was unmistakably his father. The scowl was identical. The man looked his son up and down, covered in food waste and shame. "Get in the back," he growled. "You're not sitting on my seats like that." Tyler's pickup showed up last, driven by what seemed to be his older brother, who burst into laughter the moment he saw the state of him. "Dude, you smell like failure and fountain water," he cackled. "This is definitely going on my socials." One by one, the cars pulled away with their humiliated cargo. Ethan and I stood quietly in the lot, watching the taillights vanish into the Oregon night. The overhead security camera blinked silently above us, having captured every second. "Well," Ethan said, wrapping an arm around my shoulder. "That was more action than I expected from dinner." "I tried to keep it peaceful," I murmured, leaning into him. "They chose escalation." Eric approached one last time, still wide-eyed. "Ma'am, I have to ask. Where did you learn to do that?" 15 years in Special Forces, I replied simply. "Turns out, the training sticks." His eyes widened with new respect. "I had no idea." "Those guys definitely didn't either." "That's the point," Ethan added with a knowing smile. "The best warriors never look like warriors." "Dinner's on the house tonight," Eric said quickly. "And if you ever want to come back, you'll have the best table in the house." As we walked back to Ethan's truck, I noticed my cardigan still folded neatly on the hood where I'd left it. I slipped it back on, once again, no longer the operative, just the suburban wife heading home. "You know," Ethan said as he started the engine, "I was ready to step in if it got out of hand." "I know," I said, reaching for his hand. But it felt good handling it myself. The drive home was quiet. The kind of silence that comes with years of understanding and absolute trust. Soft country music played on the radio as Portland's lights sparkled like low stars outside the windshield. When we got home, Ethan pulled me close as we climbed the front steps. "Have I told you lately how proud I am to be your husband?" he whispered into my ear. "Show me," I whispered back. And he did. We spent the rest of the evening not just celebrating our love, but the quiet strength that comes from knowing exactly who you are, and what you're capable of when the moment calls for it. As for the boys, they learned their lesson, one that followed them long after the bruises and the smell wore off. Security footage, as promised, was reviewed when Brandon attempted to press assault charges. The video clearly showed him throwing the first punch, and me acting only in self-defense. When the footage inevitably leaked online, it went viral under hashtags like #InstantKarma and #WrongWoman. The internet watched, laughed, and marveled as 3 arrogant college guys were dismantled by a woman half their combined size, without her throwing a single punch. Their university's disciplinary board wasn't amused. They were placed on academic probation and ordered to complete sensitivity training. Their families were horrified. Their friends teased them endlessly. And their dating lives? Practically extinct. Word spread fast on campus about their spectacular failure to intimidate the wrong woman. Looking back on that night, I realized the best lessons don't always come from confrontation, but from being ready when confrontation finds you. Because true strength isn't about overpowering others. It's about protecting what matters, with exactly the right amount of force. In the end, it wasn't about proving anything. It wasn't about dominance, or ego, or making anyone feel small. It was about boundaries. About respect. About showing that quiet strength isn't weakness, it's control. It's discipline. And it's knowing when to rise, not to destroy, but to protect. They thought they were facing someone fragile. What they met was a woman forged in resilience. And while they'll remember that night as the most embarrassing moment of their lives, I'll remember it as just another quiet evening, reminding the world that grace under pressure is a force far more powerful than fists. Because sometimes, the greatest power is walking away with your dignity, and leaving the rest in the trash where it belongs. Not all heroes wear capes. Sometimes, they just want to eat in peace. If this story caught you off guard, just wait for the next ones. Tap like, subscribe to the channel, and join us for more stories you won't believe are real.